Australia's Labour Prime Minister, John Curtin.
I'm happy to be back in Australia. I've seen many things and many places. And although every man can be forgiven for loving his own country best, I believe it is an impartial assessment of the facts to say that I have not seen any country or any people better than my own.
Welcome to Curtin's Cast, the John Curtin Research Centre's podcast, brought to you by myself, Nick Dyrenforth, and Redbridge's Cos Samaras. Each week, we bring you the freshest and most challenging conversations from the world of Australian and global politics, culture and ideas. Good morning, Curtinistas. Welcome back to Curtin's Cast. We've got a very special Curtin's Cast this morning. We're a few days on from the 2025 Curtin Oration held at Daltoni House in Sydney with the Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese. We've also got Kung Fu Cos away, traipsing through Rome and these ancient homelands of Greece. So we've got a very special Curtin's Cast for you this week. We've got the entire speech delivered by Anthony Albanese for the Curtin Oration. It was a cracker, widely reported on. And then as an extra bonus, the 20-minute Q&A, which the Prime Minister very generously offered to sit down and conduct with our chair, Sam Almaliki.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a tremendous honour to welcome you to the 2025 Curtin Oration, and it's an even greater honour that tonight's keynote is being delivered by our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. I'm conscious that a lengthy introduction is scarcely required. After all, the PM has quite recently etched his name into the history books of Australia in ways that speak for themselves. He is the first Prime Minister re-elected since John Howard in 2004. He is the first Labor Prime Minister re-elected since Bob Hawke in 1984. And alongside Hawkey and the great Gough Whitlam, he is now one of only three Labor leaders, one of three in 124 years of this party's federal history, to take the party out of opposition into government and then win re-election. Now, friends, that alone is extraordinary, but let's not forget that in May, he led Labor to its largest federal victory since the man we honour tonight, John Curtin, in 1943. Now, as epic as Curtin's triumph was, he did have the advantage of incumbency during a world war. And frankly, a Tory opposition which made Peter Dutton's LNP outfit appear like a well-oiled machine. Now, often in the history of the Labor Party, for true believers, it has felt like God votes Tory or guides Aussies to vote Tory. And I should say, I don't mean to talk down the great John Curtin in my preemptive remarks. But also in 1943, God blessed Labor most magnificently. Pure Schadenfreude. The opposition leader facing off against Curtin, can anyone guess the name? William Morris Hughes. Billy Hughes, who was then an octogenarian. He was aged 80, almost 81. This is the same Billy Hughes who once jailed John Curtin during the conscription crisis of 1916-1917. And tore the Labor Party asunder. Hughes, of course, ratted on the Labor Party and caused immense sectarian and social division in this country. And he went on to lead many iterations of the Tories. Of course, famously drawing the line at joining the Country Party, now the Nationals. But tonight we're here to honour John Curtin's legacy. And we're also here to celebrate a modern Labor leader who has fought Tories like Hughes, his entire political life and beaten them at a general election, not once, but twice. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I feel like saying, well, that's done and heading off now. But thank you so much for that introduction, Nick, and thank you to everyone here for that very honourable start to what is for me a great honour to give the John Curtin Oration for 2025. And I, of course, begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and I pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. 80 years ago, Acting Prime Minister Frank Ford rose in the House of Representatives, and he told a still and sombre chamber, "The captain has been stricken in sight of the shore." Through the dark days of conflict, John Curtin had urged the men and women of Australia forward to victory in war, victory for the peace. He would not live to see either, yet no Australian did more to achieve both. It is an honour to be with you tonight to reflect on the extraordinary and enduring achievements of a Labor icon and a great Australian. Through 124 years of our federation and 31 Prime Ministers of Australia, John Curtin stands apart. No leader of our nation has faced a sterner test. No one has known a darker hour. And no Prime Minister has carried more on their shoulders alone. During the collapse of the Menzies and then Fadden governments, John Curtin did not push to seize power. Instead, power came to him. The Parliament and the nation turned to Labor. And within 4 months of being sworn in as Prime Minister, Curtin found himself leading the battle for Australia. Singapore had fallen. Darwin had been bombed. And he was locked in a battle of wills with the British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, as well as the President of the United States, Franklin Roosevelt. John Curtin, a person so mindful of his flaws and limitations, pushing back against two of the most powerful men in the world and two of the most forceful personalities of 20th century politics. This moment is the core of the Curtin legend. Two divisions of the Australian Imperial Force returning from the Middle East. Curtin wanted those troops for the defence of Australia. Churchill wanted them in Burma, and Roosevelt backed him. Barely 2 months after Curtin had said that Australia looked to America, America was telling us to listen to Britain. It says a great deal about the nature of our relationship with Great Britain up to that point, and indeed the character of Curtin's predecessors, that Churchill had assumed that Australia would just roll over. We know this because he had already given orders for the Admiralty troops ships carrying Australian soldiers to change course and steam to what was then called Rangoon. Diplomatic cables between leaders can be wrapped in all kinds of formalities and flattery. Curtin's message to Churchill on learning this news is a study in the power of plain speaking. Language sanded back so you can see the grain. First, he rebukes Churchill for treating Australia's agreement to the diversion of Australian soldiers, to quote him, merely as a matter of form. And he goes on speaking not just for his party or his government, but for his country. We feel a primary obligation to save Australia. Some historians downplay the military significance of that moment. They argue the threat of invasion was always exaggerated. But consider the counterfactual. If Churchill and FDR had got their way, Australian forces would have arrived in Burma barely a week before it fell to the Japanese. Hundreds, if not thousands, of Australians would have been killed or taken prisoner. It would have been a disaster every bit as crushing to national morale as the fall of Singapore was. Instead, John Curtin prevailed, and he paid for that victory with the hardest and loneliest weeks of his life, knowing those transports, those Australian troops, were out on the Indian Ocean on his orders. This was the solitary burden he bore in his long walks around the base of Mount Ainslie and back and forth in the grounds of the lodge under the moonlight. His mind 1,000 miles away, fearful of the very worst. No one could truly know the weight that he carried in those dark days, but all could see the toll that it took. Even when the 7th Division docked safely in Adelaide, that pattern of mental and physical strain had been set. Today, at the safe distance of 8 decades, the story of the Second World War is set in our memory. The Allied victory over tyranny has, in retrospect, taken on a feel of inevitability. Part of the debt that we owe John Curtin, together with all the men and women who served Australia in that terrible conflict, is to remind ourselves how close history came to taking a very different path. Curtin grasped that, and he never pretended to the people or to himself that dealing with these choices came easily. John Curtin dedicated his life to our country, and he gave his life for Australia. His colleagues saw him as a casualty of the war as much as any fallen soldier, and that self-sacrifice has helped shape every reflection on his legacy. When Prime Minister Gough Whitlam laid the foundation stone for John Curtin House in Canberra in 1974, he paid moving tribute to a man enslaved by the times, for whom time was a cruel master. That is a fundamental, inescapable part of the John Curtin story, but it is not the whole. His leadership has earned a bigger place in history than that, and his legacy runs deeper than that, for our party and for our country. Because Curtin restored in Labor what he revived in Australia: unity and purpose in times of crisis and uncertainty, ambition and cooperation in pursuit of opportunity, and above all, the confidence and determination to think and act for ourselves, to follow our own course and shape our own future. Curtin once said that the greatness of the Australian labour movement lay in the fact that it had never followed the flags of other lands or patterned itself on the movements which originated in other places. This was the country John Curtin was born into, the social laboratory, the workers' paradise, a nation that led the world in creating a fair minimum wage, independently set, a pension when you go old, support if you got sick, protections and respect for the right of workers to organise and bargain and demand better for themselves, and a democracy that was stronger because women could vote in elections and run for Parliament. That spirit of social democratic creativity had ebbed away under Conservative governments. Curtin, together with Chifley, gave it new life and meaning. Curtin empowered Chifley to lead the Department of Reconstruction in 1942. Just think about that, 1942. As John Edwards wrote, Roosevelt remade the US economy before the war, Attlee remade the British economy after the war, Curtin remade the Australian economy during the war, because his vision, even in the darkest hour of conflict, was for a peace worth the winning, a nation that honoured the courage and sacrifice of its citizens with more than monuments and memorials, where the bravery of Australians had won them the right to build a good life for themselves and their families, with new opportunities in education, secure well-paid jobs in manufacturing, affordable medicines through the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme, and a society where, to quote that government's housing policy, a home was not only the need but the right of every citizen. I used those same words at our campaign launch in Perth this year, because while our nation has changed beyond the imagining of the Labor generations that have gone before us, respect for the aspirations of the Australian people is still what drives us, and the spirit of progressive patriotism still moves us. We understand that part of what makes this the best country on earth is that all of us share a responsibility and a determination to make it even better and fairer. That is why we are making the biggest ever investment in Medicare, so more Australians than ever before can see a doctor for free. It's why we've made it clear that under our government, the PBS is not up for negotiation. And it's why on Tuesday we built on two great Labor reforms and we brought them together. We lifted superannuation to 12%, we expanded paid parental leave by a further 2 weeks, and for the first time ever, we are adding superannuation to it. So women who take time away from work to be with their new bub don't pay a penalty in retirement. This is about building an economy and a society that upholds Australian values and values every Australian. That is the Labor way, and it is the Australian way under Labor, because we do not seek our inspiration overseas, we find it right here in our people, and we carry it with us in the way that we engage with the world. John Curtin is rightly honoured as the founder of Australia's alliance with the United States, a pillar of our foreign policy, our most important defence and security partnership, and a relationship that commands bipartisan support, respect and affection in both our nations. Yet our alliance with the US ought to be remembered as a product of Curtin's leadership in defence and foreign policy, not the extent of it. Because Curtin's famous statement that Australia looked to America was much more than the idea of trading one strategic guarantor for another, or swapping an alliance with the old world for one with the new. It was a recognition that Australia's fate would be decided in our region. It followed the decision Curtin had made in 1941 that Australia would issue its own declaration of war with Japan, speaking for ourselves as a sovereign nation, where Menzies had said that because Britain was at war with Germany, as a result, Australia was also at war. Under Labor, Curtin said Australia was at war because our vital interests are imperilled and because the rights of free people in the whole Pacific are assailed. That's what Curtin recognised. This was a Pacific war. It was its own conflict which demanded its own strategy. Our security could not be outsourced to London or trusted to vague assurances from Britain. We needed an Australian foreign policy anchored in strategic reality, not bound by tradition, dealing with the world as it is, not as we would like it to be. As Paul Keating put it in his John Curtin Memorial Lecture, Curtin began us thinking on our own terms. So we remember Curtin not just because he looked to America. We honour him because he spoke for Australia. For Australia and for Labor, that independence has never meant isolationism. Choosing our own way doesn't mean going it alone. It was the Curtin and Chifley governments that brought Australia into the United Nations, the World Bank and the IMF at the outset. Australia didn't just join the institutions which created the international rules-based order, we helped shape them. Because we did not want the future of our region to rest on what Doc Evatt called a great power peace. Then and now we championed the rights and role of middle powers and smaller nations. Then and now we recognise that our region's security depends on collective responsibility. Then and now we strive for a world where the sovereignty of every nation is respected and the dignity of every individual is upheld. Then and now, Australia backs our words with deeds. 80 years ago, Australia under Chifley was one of the first countries in the world to publicly support the people of Indonesia in their struggle for independence, and part of the first ever UN peacekeeping mission to help secure Indonesian sovereignty. Ever since, Labor governments have understood that Australia's security and our prosperity depend on engaging with our region as ourselves, investing in our capabilities and investing in our relationships. In times of profound change in our region and against the backdrop of global uncertainty, Australia under Labor has always had the courage and imagination to play a constructive and creative role. That's the approach our government has taken from day one, rebuilding our standing as a leader and partner in the Pacific, patiently and deliberately working to stabilise our relationship with China, deepening our economic engagement across Southeast Asia, forging new defence and security cooperation with our nearest neighbours, Indonesia and Papua New Guinea, and giving our security and trade and energy partnership with India the long overdue investment and attention it deserves. The Australian Labor Party is Australia's oldest and greatest political party, and the movement which gave it life is older still. Anniversaries like this, along with the work of Nick and the John Curtin Research Centre, remind us of the fullness and richness of the story which we are honoured to belong to. Yet the great creative tension of Australian Labor is that while we love our history, we are not hostages to it. We are links in a long chain. We are not shackled to our past. We draw from it, we build on it, and we learn from it. As a junior member of the Scullin government, Curtin had watched in dismay and frustration as the hopes invested in that Labor government fell victim to events, its ambitions crushed by the Great Depression, its fate sealed by foreign banks and the state premiers. For Curtin, who lost his seat in the landslide defeat that followed, a hard lesson of those years was that Labor could never again allow itself to be seen as ineffectual in times of economic crisis. That's part of what drove Curtin and Chifley to put the Commonwealth at the centre of tax and revenue. They understood that Australia could not meet the twin challenges of mobilisation and reconstruction as a disparate collection of states pulling in different directions. And when you consider the big challenges and opportunities facing Australia today, building the new homes and infrastructure our suburbs and regions need, securing the future of the National Disability Insurance Scheme, powering new jobs and industries through the energy transition, training our workforce and workplaces so that artificial intelligence is a creator of good jobs, not a threat to them. None of that can be realised by one level of government on its own, or indeed by government alone. It depends, as ever, on mobilising the talents and capacity of all Australians. The world John Curtin knew and the nation he served belong to history now. Yet, the lessons of his life and legacy endure. Because while the nature of global uncertainty evolves, this fundamental truth remains. Australia cannot predict or control the challenges we will face, but we can determine how we respond. We can choose the way we engage with our region and the way we deal with the world. The stability and prosperity we build and defend with our partners, the peace and security we seek for ourselves. And above all, we can choose the nation we strive to build here at home, an economy that rewards hard work and creates opportunity, a society true to the values of fairness and aspiration that Australians voted for on the 3rd of May, and a government worthy of the people we are proud to serve, repaying the trust that Australians have placed in us and living up to the example of courage and kindness that Australians set for us every day. That is the Labor way, that is the Australian way, that is our way forward for the future. Thanks very much.
Prime Minister, it's an absolute honour to have you pay tribute to John Curtin and join us here tonight. Can I say I'm particularly honoured as a fellow former public housing tenant to know that right here sits someone who also lived in public housing and now holds the highest office in the country. I'm sure you feel immensely proud that it's very much an embodiment of your mantra, nobody left behind, no one held back. How has that experience shaped your Prime Ministership and your approach to public life?
I think one of the proudest moments that I've had as PM was on the day before Parliament sits. We have a solemn occasion at the War Memorial that'll happen on this time around on the 21st of July. And last time I had a text message as I was being driven back to the lodge after that on the Monday night at about 6 o'clock, and it was from a mate of mine, a houseo mate of mine, Cherie, who I grew up with, and it was a photo of me speaking at the War Memorial, and I said, where are you? I rang her. I said, are you in Canberra? And a bunch of the people I grew up with had travelled from Clayton, who's a wharfie at Freo, had come from WA with his partner, Wendy from Melbourne. People had come from Scott and Cherie, lived both of them in this one block estate where I grew up in Camperdown, not far from here. They ended up marrying and now are very proud grandparents together. They were both there. And this bunch of people who I grew up with had made a huge effort through Facebook. You can do these things these days. They're still all connected. And had come as a surprise because they wanted to see their mate they grew up with be in Parliament for the first day as Prime Minister. So I just think that the moments of solidarity and of never forgetting where you come from, I'm in public housing now, but it's a bit better than the one that I grew up in. And yeah, there wasn't a blade of grass, not only in my house, in any of the area where I grew up with there in Camperdown, opposite the old kids' hospital. But keeping in touch is really important. It's important physically. They're all going to be there this time round. We've organised it this time. So they're having dinner at the lodge on Monday the 21st of July. And that for me is as important as having a dinner at the G7 or the G20. And that's what's really important, I think, about what Labor governments do. I think that was one of the things about the last election campaign was that we stayed connected. We were out there talking about cost of living and making a difference on things that would make a real positive difference to people's lives, not fighting culture wars. And I just think that's really important, staying grounded.
Terrific. I think it's the ultimate upgrade from Hauser to the Lodge. PM, one of the striking parallels between you and, in fact, the great John Curtin is your ability to read the Australian people and to stay in touch, as you rightfully said. Frank Ford, who was acting Prime Minister on the passing of John Curtin, said, "This common man, this great son of the people," really invoking that sort of common touch streak that John Curtin had. And clearly you have it in spades. How do you compare that to what your opponents were putting up during the campaign?
I was always reasonably confident of an outcome because I knew what it took to take a party from opposition to government. It takes hard yards. You've got to talk to people that you don't agree with as well as people you agree with. And doing Sky After Dark and Ray Hadley every Thursday morning is not a way to prep for a campaign or to actually have any scrutiny. You've got to open yourself up. You've got to do... I enjoy doing things like lectures. I've spoken and speeches that you put effort into and that you think about, and because it's that discipline. So much of the world now is instant. So something like tonight that probably went through 6 drafts, is what you do because you're thinking about it, and then you're thinking about other things, beyond just the event in itself. So I've done the National Press Club, I think, 12 times as Labor leader. Done it 3 times this year, but do a range of events. I did the Australian Sky Economic Forum yesterday. I try to get out and about and do those things, and they just, they hadn't done it. And day one of the campaign was called on Friday morning, 7 a.m, and then I went to Queensland. And I decided, some people thought we were just having a lend, but I always thought Dixon was on. And headed to Dixon, 8 a.m, Saturday morning, after the election was called. And I got my friends who I travel these days with, I said, stop the car, and I went into this gym, like cold, with, there were 30, 40 people doing a morning exercise thing in Marumba Downs, heartland of Dixon electorate. And doing things like that, you've got to engage. I thought one of the most absurd elements of the campaign was the pictures of Peter and the coalition, Bridget McKenzie and people in a field of a winery announcing a rail line at the airport to the airport in Melbourne. They were nowhere near the airport, they weren't near a rail line, and they weren't in Melbourne. And it was that they did everything to avoid contact with people. So as much as it provides a task for those people who look after my security in what's an uncertain time, marching into through shopping centres and things like that I did during the campaign and that I continue to do, it is really important that you're accessible and that you engage with people, not just those controlled environments. And I think the 2 campaigns were really very, very different in what they look like and on our approach to engagement.
I think if you're a former Houser, you can walk through any crowd.
That's right.
Our fellow board member and co-MC tonight, Priya Brown, paid tribute to Jodie in the way she may have been part of the reason why you were so relaxed. I think it's fair to say having confidence of outcome certainly helps you feel at ease. I liken it to a cricketing batsman. You're far more at ease at the crease if you're confident of your abilities and the outcome. But I did hear Jodie mention her experience in going into work after your opponents, the Conservatives, were talking about canning basically working from home as a policy.
Yeah.
And Just want to sort of draw on that sense of reality that you're able to draw on most immediately through Jodie and others in your life. How important is that?
Oh, absolutely, it matters. Jodie, by definition, does work. Sometimes she works full time, but some of the time that's from home. And so she was red hot with anger about it. So even if I didn't agree we were going to go after it, I would have.
Well played.
You know, there are some rights that your partner has, and that's one of them. She was red hot and kept, indeed, if anything, was being critical that we weren't doing enough about working from home. I was like, we've done this, and this. We're doing ads. We're doing everything. But it was just really conscious, and that was another. That's why you need a parliamentary team too that looks like the Australian people. If you want to be in touch with them, and the diversity we have of 56% of our caucus are women. We have people of different faiths, different ethnicities. You look at us, and I think it's going to be really dramatic on that first day of the 22nd of July, because there'll be this small group, like there won't even be people here are familiar with Parliament, but the horseshoe, they're choosing to not even have people on the front bench in the horseshoe, and we don't fit all on one side, so we've got to slide across. Some of our assistant ministers will be on that side of the house. We'll be looking at them. But they're a bunch of blokes will be there, essentially, will be their team. It's a very narrow base that they have, and it's really important that events like this and that our movement be dynamic and vibrant and engaging and welcoming of people as well.
Couldn't agree more. I do want to come back to this theme of being confident of outcome, and I think seasoned observers have remarked that sense of self-assuredness that you've projected since the government's re-election. What do you say to some of those who observers then go on to say, is the government and the Prime Minister ambitious enough for Australia? What's your response to those people?
That our first task, it seems to me there's a bit of a disconnection between saying, you're really successful, you got 94 seats, so now what you should do is not do what people voted for, but do something else. We're not going to get ahead of ourselves. Our first task is to implement the policies that we took to the election. But obviously that's not the limit of our ambitions. Inevitably, you have things that you have to deal with that come at you. If you had have said at the beginning of 2022 that we would put a cap on gas and coal prices, people would have gone, oh my goodness, that's the most radical thing ever. Well, we did that with Dominic Perrottet here in New South Wales. And so, you deal with issues as they come, and we will have to do that. But I think there's also a task in terms of winning broader support. It's how change happens. That's why we're doing, I thought the pitch for the John Curtin Research Centre was magnificent before, about the importance of ideas. And that's one of the reasons why we are doing the productivity roundtable. We welcome ideas. And, if they can win support and are broad, we made the decision to change the stage 3 tax cuts because it was the right thing to do. Circumstances had changed. I was upfront about that. I owned it, went to the National Press Club, and there's no one now says that was a bad idea. And indeed, the opposition went from saying we should hold an election on it to voting for it in the Parliament. It went through unanimously through both houses. And so sometimes, if circumstances change, then, you grasp the moment that's before you. And so I do think, though, that your starting point's got to be the platform that you took to the election, which is ambitious. I mean, if we achieve, a 43% reduction in emissions by 2030, 1.2 million homes being built, changing childcare so that it's available, affordable childcare is universal, dealing with the change that we did on education is a good example. I mean, Gonski was spoken about and was a great Labor initiative that Julia Gillard particularly championed. It was really sort of on the shelf. We got it done. Like, we now have agreements to fully fund every school, to give every child the funding they deserve to create opportunity.
It's certainly a terrific agenda and list of achievements over the last 3 years, but lots to look forward ahead. You spoke about the productivity roundtable, and I thought it was quite brilliant yesterday that in the News Corp's Economic Forum, you, in a way, batted down the very idea of broadening and increasing the GST. And I know, and like everybody in this room, whoever you talk to, your workmates, your family, everyone is still trying to catch up with the impact of inflation, with the cost of living. And that's despite, as you rightfully point out, when your government came in, inflation had a 6 in front of it, it now has a 2. Interest rates are coming down and people are feeling they can finally catch their breath. Notwithstanding that, I don't think people have an appetite for an increase in a regressive tax that will impact every single person, every single household. If that's out of question, what are you open to come back from this productivity roundtable, and what does success look like by bringing in some of the biggest thinkers across unions, across business?
I think success looks like a constructive discussion that doesn't end at the end of that 3 days. That leads to change. Now, what that is, we've said very consciously, we don't want to preempt that. We don't want to do the rule in, rule out game. I was asked about and said, but the idea we say to the punters who've just voted for us, thanks very much for your vote. We had a round table and decided we're going to put up the price of everything that you buy. Would be, to quote, yes, Minister, courageous. And, you have to have, a sense of bringing people with you on change as well. I mean, that's one of the things that I'm really passionate about. I said in the lead up to 2022, I said, we're not going to do everything in the first term. You need a long-term Labor government. You need a long-term Labor government to entrench reforms that you've done. I was very proud to be a part of the Rada and Gillard governments. We did some fantastic things, but a lot of the things that were done were undone pretty quickly. And, the reason why Medicare survived was because Bob Hawke won election after election after election after election, and then Keating won. The reason why superannuation is in place, as much as they keep trying to undermine it, is because of that successful entrenching of superannuation, and now we've finally got it up to 12%. So we need to make sure we did significant reforms in industrial relations at the last, in our first term. I want to make sure that's entrenched. And, those changes that we've made, including, paid parental leave, super on that, it's really significant changes. And you need to entrench that, build on it, and win support for the change going forward. And I think we had, on the stage 3 tax cuts as a good example, we laid some groundwork for that and then argued the case really, really strongly.
It's terrific to hear that sort of consensus-style leadership. Can I just sort of take us a little bit further around the tax reform? You were quoted as trying to get the private sector to drive growth again, not the public sector, and it's fair to say, the government has done an excellent job in fiscal constraints, in, sort of bringing 2 budget surpluses in the first term, trying to constrain public spending, yet the private sector still remains low on confidence and in terms of overall investment, certainly where you would like it to be. If you're a participant in that round table, and for a second not as Prime Minister, what do you think is it going to take for the private sector to begin investing again, including in the skills of their people as we transition into a completely different economy, AI-led economy, and in a context of great global uncertainty?
I think confidence is the key, and certainty. I think one of the things that will be positive about the decisive election outcome is that it enables business to have more investment certainty. Now, every election's contestable. We're not getting ahead of ourselves there, but there's got to be, we are now in a position where the investment environment we need to facilitate is one where the job of government is to create that facilitation, not to replace private sector investment, but to encourage it. So we have a range of vehicles, for example, that we've created as well that will encourage that through the National Reconstruction Fund and a range of things. There's successful models there where government have assisted private sector investment in some of those areas, but new areas emerging as well in terms of productivity. Artificial intelligence, we've had some discussions on our table about. That can scare people, and it could be, it can have negative impacts, but it can have enormous opportunity as well if it's done right. So getting those things right, I think, is the big challenge. The global economy is changing enormously. One of the things that potentially makes a difference in Australia from some of the events we're seeing in global trade is that we are a country that does support free and fair trade. What that could have an impact on in our region is attracting increased investment into Australia because there's more certainty here about what our position will be on these things in a long-term way. And it also has a potential, this is something that I think is undervalued a little bit, be interested to see how it plays out, is there's competition for labour as well. There's competition for, the smartest ideas people. Some of what's happening in universities in some parts of the world are seeing people question whether that intellectual pursuit can be done somewhere else. Now, there's huge opportunities in all of these areas, I think, if we get it right. And the other thing, I spoke a bit about this yesterday, but the big change in the global economy as well is that technology is ubiquitous. An idea somewhere gets implemented, whether above or below the table, gets taken on, intellectual property, all of that. So the costs of labour as a proportion of the costs of production are far less. So the idea that we can't make things and compete here because our wages, which is a good thing, are better than they are in parts of Southeast Asia, for example, China, Taiwan. We now are in a position of a comparative advantage with the space we have, the resources we have, the skills we have, the fact that people will look towards clean energy for how things are produced as well. And so I think that the opportunities, if we get it right this decade, we can really set Australia up for the decades ahead.
It's a very exciting prospect, particularly for young people in a transitioning economy. Just drawing our attention to the global stage, and particularly leading up and during the election and post-election, you've spoken a lot about doing things the Australian way and that progressive patriotism at the heart of how we approach things on the global stage and here at home. And it's something we've long argued for here at the Centre. Our executive director has been, Nick Dyrenforth, has been huge on progressive patriotism, because for a long time it seemed to be the domain of conservatives, when really it's always been Labor that's been the great patriots, the party of great patriots, Curtin, Chifley, Hawke, Keating and so forth. And now we're seeing that in yourself, may I say so myself, in terms of how we're approaching the global challenges. How does that progressive patriotism play here in a practical sense on a domestic level for you, not just on the international stage?
By us standing up for our values, by us doing things like saying our pharmaceutical benefit scheme, our media bargaining code, our protection of our agricultural sector is something that's not up for grabs. By us being proud of who we are and what we're creating here as well. I mean, the other asset that we have here, of course, is a diaspora that connects us with every country on earth. You know, I will lead a delegation of business leaders with the BCA coming to China. This time next week I'll be in Shanghai and convening a meeting with business leaders. Part of that connection that we have is really important as well. So I think, just being, sometimes we talk ourselves down. I hope that sort of came through in the speech tonight, is that Curtin was, a patriot. And yes, that means, in the strategic competition that's there in the world, we're with the United States. We're with democratic countries. We don't shy away from that at all, of where our alliances are. I am a supporter of AUKUS. That's important. But that doesn't mean that we are subservient to any other country. We should be really proud of who we are. We are a middle power. And when I look at some of the commentary that is there, it kind of writes us off as if we're, not a serious operator, as if we're just a taker of whatever is given to us. We're a giver. Australia, we punch above our weight in international forums. We always pay our own way, and we're a major contributor, a major success story. And one way that we've done that is through what we've just come through. Where I say during the election campaign, we were very careful to say we're turning the corner. I think at 2.1 we can say we've turned the corner. But we did that without doing what economists and a whole bunch of people would tell us to do, and some of the conservative commentators certainly would, which is you need to get higher unemployment. Unemployment isn't high enough, and you need to cut wages and conditions. Well, we did it our way, and we have inflation down, employment up, 1.1 million jobs, and wages up. So that's the Australian way.
It really is a great success, and I think once again you're in sync with the Australian people. I feel in conversations certainly I have, and I know that the Research Centre facilitates through a range of forums. Australians love that sense of quiet yet defiant patriotism, not one that seeks to explore or exploit division. as some of the commentators like to do, and certainly those on the Conservative side love doing, particularly come election time. So certainly all of us are with you in that quest to continue to protect the Australian way and our interests and what they mean at a domestic level for working people in particular. Can I just ask you, no doubt, a question that's on everyone's mind? How are the wedding plans going?
Well, they're going.
Jodie's looking at you going, don't say too much, I think.
Well, we've been. It's very hard for us to be discreet about it, but I'm very much looking forward to it. We made the conscious decision to wait until after the election so that it wasn't spoilt by the sort of commentary that would come in about something that's very personal. I've been very fortunate to find someone that I want to spend the rest of my life with, and that she feels the same way. And it's going to be pretty small, and so it'll be small, intimate, with close friends and family. And if we get lucky, you'll read about it after the event. But we'll see how that goes.
Well, you and Jodie have all our best wishes ahead of that terrific milestone. Can I just finish up, Prime Minister, by saying on behalf of everybody at the John Curtin Research Centre, our board, our advisory committee, all of our partners here tonight, thank you so much for joining us in paying a wonderful tribute to John Curtin and the 80th anniversary of his passing. James Curran, professor at Sydney University, was quoted in the ABC today saying that this was easily going to be your most significant speech in office. Well, can I say it was also one of your most sterling? Thank you so much.